The dust motes danced in the weak afternoon sun, slanting through the grimy window of my office. They were a universe unto themselves, each particle a tiny world, oblivious to the vast, indifferent emptiness I spent my days staring into. My name is Dean. Used to be, I was the guy who saw the stars as a canvas for wonder. Now, they were just points of light in a cold, predictable equation. My desk was a monument to this disillusionment. Stacks of papers filled with calculations that led nowhere, a lukewarm mug of coffee, and a framed photo of a younger me, eyes bright, pointing at a sky I no longer felt a connection to. The hum of the servers in the next room was a constant, low thrum, a mechanical heartbeat that underscored the silence. It was the sound of progress, they said, the sound of uncovering the universe's secrets. To me, it just sounded like a slow, monotonous fade. I traced the rim of my mug, the ceramic cool against my fingertip. Another Tuesday. Another day spent sifting through data that felt increasingly like sand slipping through my fingers. I'd once dreamed of charting the unknown, of pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Now, I just felt like a cog in a very large, very dull machine. My gaze drifted to the monitor, a familiar, featureless expanse of astronomical data. For hours, I'd been running diagnostics on the deep space array, a futile attempt to find. I didn't even know what anymore. A flicker of something, a deviation, anything to break the suffocating sameness. The signal-to-noise ratio was abysmal as always. It was the universe's ambient noise, and I was drowning in it. Then it happened. A blip, tiny, almost imperceptible, but there. A spike on the waveform, too regular to be random, too distinct to be noise. My breath hitched. My hand, which had been resting listlessly on the desk, tensed. I leaned closer, my nose almost touching the screen. I ran the analysis again, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a forgotten urgency. The anomaly persisted. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't an equipment malfunction. It was a signal, a structured signal. My heart, which had been beating a sluggish rhythm, began to pick up pace. Not the frantic pounding of fear, but the excited thrum of a hunter catching a scent. The signal was weak, impossibly so, as if it had traveled for eons, its strength leached away by the sheer, crushing distance. I isolated the coordinates, cross-referencing them with every known celestial catalog. Nothing. No stars, no nebulae, no galaxies, just space, empty space. A shiver, unrelated to the office's stale air conditioning, traced its way down my spine. This was what I'd been looking for, but it wasn't just something. The pattern of the signal, as rudimentary as it was, spoke of intent, of an origin. I spent the next few hours lost in the data, the world outside my office ceasing to exist. The signal repeated, a rhythmic sequence of pulses, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat. It was unlike any natural phenomenon I'd ever encountered. It was too clean, too ordered. My disillusionment began to recede, replaced by a gnawing curiosity, a feeling that had been dormant for far too long. The signal originated from a point that, according to all our maps, was an absolute vacuum. But the data insisted otherwise. As the sky outside deepened to a bruised twilight, I found myself staring at a secondary anomaly, a faint energy signature accompanying the signal. It was bizarre, unlike any known form of radiation. It was. My mind raced, trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle, but it was like trying to force a jagged shard into a smooth, polished surface. It didn't belong. It defied every principle I understood. The rate of decay, the faintness of its transmission, it suggested an origin so ancient that our own universe might be considered a fleeting, ephemeral thing in comparison. I decided I had to see it for myself. The coordinates pointed to a region of the Earth, surprisingly close, that was geologically unique. A place known for its deep, unexplored caverns. The cave system with paintings older than humans. It felt absurd, a leap of logic that would make any sensible scientist scoff. But the signal, the energy signature, they were tied to that location. It was a hunch, a desperate, irrational leap born from years of staring at empty data. I packed a small bag, the mundane act feeling surreal after the cosmic revelation. The hum of the servers seemed to mark me now, the sound of a world I was leaving behind. As I stepped out of the office, the night air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth. The stars were beginning to prick the velvet sky, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking at them for answers. The drive felt like an eternity, the city lights receding, replaced by the inky blackness of the countryside. My hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. This was madness, chasing a phantom signal to a place of ancient art. It was a primal fear, a sense that I was stepping onto a path that led to something I couldn't comprehend, something that existed outside the comfortable boundaries of my understanding. I arrived at the designated coordinates just as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern horizon. A palpable stillness hung in the air, broken only by the distant cry of a bird. I took a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and something else, something ancient and unsettling. The entrance opened into a vast chamber, the walls adorned with faded ochre paintings. Figures, unlike any human depiction I'd ever seen, writhed and stretched across the stone, their forms alien and disturbing. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, their eyes, mere darts of pigment, tracking my every move. And then I felt it. A subtle vibration, emanating from deeper within the cave. A low thrum that resonated not in my ears, but in my very bones. It was the same rhythm as the signal. It was coming from here, but what was it? And why was it broadcasting from a place that predated humanity itself? My name is Dean. Used to be I was the guy who saw the stars as glittering promises, as maps to uncharted territories of wonder. Now they just looked like pinpricks of light against an infinite, suffocating black. The anomaly, though, that was different. It wasn't just a signal. It was a presence. A deliberate, intricate pattern woven into the static of the universe, blooming from a void where nothing should be. I'd spent weeks chasing it, rerouting my telescope's focus, cross-referencing databases, my initial scientific curiosity curdling into something far more primal. It felt wrong, like a perfectly formed equation that somehow contained a division by zero, a mathematical impossibility made manifest. I leaned closer to the monitor, the hum of the server room, a low thrum beneath my desk. The signal's waveform was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It wasn't a radio wave, not a neutrino burst, not any known form of electromagnetic radiation. It was a symphony of frequencies that shouldn't coexist, a cascade of data that defied the very laws of physics I dedicated my life to understanding. The origin point remained stubbornly elusive, a pinpoint on the celestial sphere that resolved into absolute nothingness when I tried to zoom in. A ghost in the cosmic machine. My fingers, stained with coffee and cheap ink, flew across the keyboard. I ran simulations, algorithms designed to detect exotic particles, to find echoes of gravitational waves. Nothing. The signal simply was. A stubborn fact in a universe that preferred subtle truths. It was like trying to measure the weight of a shadow. A sharp rap on my door made me jump, my heart lurching in my chest. Dean, always Dean. Still at it, huh? The voice belonged to a colleague, a man whose pragmatism was as thick as the calluses on his hands from his hobby of restoring antique machinery. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the sterile hallway light, a half-eaten sandwich in his hand. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had settled in my gut. Just looking into something interesting. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the cluttered desk, the charts pinned to the wall, the glowing monitors. He was a good man, grounded, practical. He believed in tangible things, in gears and levers and the predictable arc of a thrown ball. Interesting how. Looks like I read trying to decode alien transmissions again. He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. It's not like that, I said, my voice tighter than I intended. This is different. He took a bite of his sandwich, chewing thoughtfully. Different how? More little green men sending us their grocery lists. I gestured vaguely at the monitor, the alien waveform pulsing with an unsettling rhythm. Look at this. The spectral analysis. It's impossible. The energy signatures are all wrong. They shouldn't be able to exist in the same space, let alone be emitted from a single point. He peered at the screen, his brow furrowed. He was trying, I could see that, but the data was too abstract, too far removed from his world of torque and tensile strength. Looks like a bunch of squiggles to me, Dean. Maybe my equipment's acting up. Old buildings, I know. Interference. It's not interference. I've checked everything. The signal is clean, it's structured, deliberate. The word felt inadequate, like calling a supernova a mild sunburn. He shrugged, finishing his sandwich. Well, I keep at it. Just don't miss the departmental budget meeting next week. They're talking about cutting back on things like this. He gave a pointed look at my setup. His skepticism was a familiar weight, a constant reminder of the gulf between my observations and what the world deemed real. But his words about budget cuts, that was a different kind of pressure. It meant I had to be right. I had to prove it. I turned back to the monitors, my resolve hardening. This wasn't just about scientific curiosity anymore. I felt a strange kinship with the signal, both of us anomalies in a world that preferred order. I spent the rest of the day, and then the night, poring over the data. I started cross-referencing the signal's pattern with something entirely unrelated, something I'd stumbled upon during a late-night research binge weeks ago. Ancient cave paintings. Specifically, a set of petroglyphs discovered deep within a remote mountain range, in a cave system with paintings older than humans. They were attributed to a culture so ancient, so primitive, that their very existence was a puzzle. And there, amidst the crude depictions of animals and hunting scenes, were symbols. Geometric shapes, intricate spirals, star-like patterns that mirrored the spectral signature of the anomaly. It was impassable. Utterly, terrifyingly impassable. How could a signal from the deepest reaches of space, a signal that defied modern physics, echo in the art of a forgotten people from a time before recorded history? This wasn't just about a strange radio wave. This was about something far older, far more profound. A connection. And it was coming from that impassable point of origin. I zoomed in on the celestial coordinates again, the digital map of the sky stretching out before me. The absolute, terrifying nothingness. But now it felt different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. What was this signal? And why was it etched into the walls of a cave before humanity even knew what a star was? The hum of the servers was usually a comforting drone, a lullaby of data processing. Tonight, it felt like a discordant shriek against my eardrums. I'd been staring at the spectral analysis for what felt like days, the glowing lines on my monitor blurring into a single, insistent waveform. It was real, the signal. Every instinct, every shred of scientific training screamed it was an anomaly, an impassable whisper from the void. But it was also undeniably there. My fingers, stiff from hours of stillness, traced the contours of the repeating pattern. It wasn't random noise. There was a rhythm, a complexity that spoke of intention. I dismissed the terrestrial explanations, satellites, atmospheric interference, even clandestine military broadcasts. None of it fit. The source coordinates, impassably precise, pointed to a patch of sky utterly devoid of stars, a void within the void. Sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford. My small apartment, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, now felt like a cage. I'd replayed the raw data 1,000 times, each pass revealing a subtle nuance, a hidden layer. It was like peeling back the skin of reality, only to find something far more alien beneath. The signal wasn't just structured, it was information. But the language, if it could be called that, was utterly incomprehensible. I tried every decryption algorithm I knew, every linguistic model, even brute force pattern recognition. Nothing. It was like trying to read a book written in the language of gravity waves. Then, buried deep within a sub-frequency I'd almost dismissed as artifact, I found it. A recurring sequence, a signature that repeated with unnerving regularity. It wasn't a mathematical constant, not a known atomic signature. It was a shape. Not a visual shape, not a sound, but a conceptual one. A configuration of impassable geometry, a knot in the fabric of space-time that pulsed with a silent, ancient energy. My breath hitched. The air, thick with the scent of stale coffee and ozone from the humming equipment, grew heavy, pressing in on me. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, like 1,000 tiny needles. My heart, which I'd tried to keep steady, began to thrum against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I zoomed in, isolating the sequence. It was a three-dimensional tessellation, a structure that folded in on itself in ways that defied Euclidean space. My mind struggled to grasp it, to hold the impassable angles. It was like looking at a shadow cast by a thing that had no form. And with it came a feeling, not an emotion, but a raw, primal impression. A sense of immense age, of vast, unblinking observation. The signal wasn't a transmission. It was a trace. A residual echo of something that had passed, or perhaps was still passing, through our corner of the universe. And this geometric signature, this impassable shape, was its imprint. I needed to see the source, not just through the sterile lens of my telescopes, but to stand where the echo originated. The coordinates were a dead end, a vast expanse of nothing. But the signal itself, it had a secondary characteristic. A faint, almost imperceptible harmonic that seemed to resonate with specific geological formations on Earth. Ancient ones, places where the veil between worlds felt thin. My research had always been confined to the stars, to the grand, cosmic ballet. But this felt terrestrial, yet utterly alien, a place where the very rock seemed to hum with an unnatural resonance. I pulled up the satellite imagery, cross-referencing the faint harmonic with geological surveys. My hands trembled as I overlaid the data. There, a remote, unexplored region, a vast network of subterranean caverns, known only as the cave system with paintings older than humans. The harmonic was strongest there, unmistakably. It was insane. But the signal pulsed in my ears, the impassable geometry etched into my mind's eye. It was calling me, not with sound, but with a silent, insistent pressure. I grabbed my coat, my mind a whirlwind of disbelief and a terrifying, burgeoning certainty. The servers hummed their indifferent song. The city lights outside my window seemed impassably distant, a fragile illusion. I had to go. I had to see. What ancient entity left such a mark, and why was its echo resonating with a place so deep within our own world? It was repeating. Not just repeating, but evolving, like a biological process, but etched in pure electromagnetic energy. My fingers, stiff from hours of stillness, traced the jagged peaks. This wasn't natural. Nothing in the catalogue of known celestial phenomena could account for this. The source, according to the triangulation, was dead space, utterly, impassably empty. Yet here was this song, a song sung by the void. I leaned back, the cheap plastic of my chair groaning in protest. The stale air of my makeshift lab, a repurposed storage room in the university's basement, suddenly felt thick, suffocating. It smelled of dust and old paper, a scent I usually found grounding. Now it just felt wrong, like the smell of something ancient, something that had been buried for a very, very long time. My mind, trained to seek logical explanations, was grasping at straws. Solar flares. Unlikely the pattern was too ordered. Pulsars. Their signatures were distinct, and this was something else entirely. A glitch in my equipment. I'd run diagnostics a dozen times. Everything was functioning within normal parameters, except for the data itself. A tremor ran through my hand as I reached for my lukewarm coffee. The mug rattled against the desk. It wasn't just the coffee. The entire building seemed to vibrate, a low, resonant thrum that I hadn't noticed until now, or had I? Had it always been there, a subtle undercurrent I'd filtered out as background noise? I stood up, my knees cracking. The server room, usually a sterile box of blinking lights and whirring fans, felt different. The air was colder, prickling my skin. The hum of the machines seemed to deepen, taking on a more guttural quality. It was no longer a lullaby. It was a growl. My gaze drifted to the wall, specifically to a framed print of the Veil Nebula I kept for. Well, for irony, I suppose. A man who spent his life staring at the distant, unknowable cosmos, reduced to cataloging the mundane. But tonight, the nebula seemed to writhe. The swirling gases on the print appeared to shift, to deepen, as if the image itself were a window, not a depiction. I blinked, hard, just tired eyes. Too much screen time. I rubbed them, the friction of my fingertips on my eyelids creating fleeting, phosphorescent afterimages. When I opened them again, the print was still, but the feeling persisted. A prickling awareness, like the hairs on the back of my neck standing at attention. Something was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. I needed air, real air, not this recycled basement funk. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the emergency exit, the one that led out to the service road behind the building. The metal door was stiff, protesting its infrequent use. It groaned open, a long, drawn-out wail that echoed in the narrow corridor. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the damp scent of cut grass and distant exhaust fumes. The stars were out, a familiar, comforting blanket. I looked up, expecting the usual constellations, the steady pinpricks of light that had guided humanity for millennia. But tonight they seemed off. The familiar patterns were there, but there was a subtle distortion, a shimmer at the edges of my vision, as if the sky itself were a faulty projection. And then I heard it. Not the hum of the servers, not the groaning door. This was different. A sound from the earth itself. A low, scraping noise like stone against stone. It was coming from the old quarry, a forgotten scar on the landscape a few miles out of town. They said it was haunted, that the earth there was unstable. My heart, which I'd been trying to keep steady, now felt like a trapped bird beating against my ribs. The evolving waveform, the vibrating building, the distorted stars. And now this sound. It was a sound that felt impossibly old. Older than the university, older than the town, older than anything I could comprehend. It was the sound of something waking up, something that had been asleep for an eternity. My rational mind screamed at me to go back inside, lock the door, and pretend I'd heard nothing, to chalk it all up to stress and exhaustion. But another part of me, a part I hadn't known existed, was drawn to the sound. A morbid curiosity, perhaps, or maybe it was the signal, calling me. I found myself walking, not back towards the building, but towards the quarry. The scraping sound grew louder, more distinct, as I moved away from the faint glow of the campus lights. It was a sound that scraped not just at the earth, but at the edges of my sanity. The path to the quarry was overgrown, treacherous in the dim light. Branches whipped at my face, and loose stones skittered underfoot. The air grew heavier, the scent of damp earth mingling with something else, something metallic, like old blood, or maybe just the tang of minerals in the soil. As I approached the rim of the quarry, the scraping stopped. A profound silence descended, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. The silence was worse than the noise. I edged closer to the lip of the pit, and then I saw it. Not a single thing, but a collection of things. Deep within the quarry, illuminated by the weak moonlight, were markings carved into the stone. Not carvings that looked like they'd been made by tools. These looked grown, like the rock itself had exhaled them. They were geometric, intricate, and utterly alien. And then my gaze fell upon the entrance to a cave system. It was partially obscured by a rockfall, a jagged moor in the side of the quarry. From its depths I could feel it. A presence that pressed in on me, heavy and ancient. It was the source of the signal. My blood felt sluggish, thick. My body was a lead weight, rooted to the spot. Every instinct screamed danger, but my eyes were fixed on that opening. The spectral analysis flashed in my mind, the impossible emptiness of space. It was all connected. The paintings, they were inside the cave system. Paintings older than humans. And whatever had made them was still here, or was it? Was it the entity itself? Was it a residue? A scar left behind by something that had passed through this place eons ago. It wasn't a sound I heard, but a sensation. A thought that wasn't my own. I could run. I could scramble back to my lab, lock myself in, and try to forget. Or I could step into the maw of that cave, into the heart of the unknown. The air inside the cave system, with paintings older than humans, was thick. Not just with the damp, earthy smell of ancient rock, but with something else, something that pressed in on my lungs, making each breath a deliberate, conscious effort. It was cold, a biting, bone-deep chill that no amount of layering could ward off. My headlamp beam, a pathetic spear against the encroaching gloom, danced over surfaces that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I'd convinced myself that the signal was a fluke, a distortion, a trick of the universe. But then came the dreams, vivid and unsettling, of geometric impossibilities and a silence that screamed. My boots crunched on loose scree, the sound unnervingly loud in the profound quiet. The walls of the passage began to shift, the rough-hewn rock giving way to smoother, sculpted surfaces. And then I saw them. The paintings. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen in textbooks or museums. No crude depictions of animals or hunting scenes. These were Different, swirling patterns, impassably intricate, rendered in pigments that still held a vibrant, alien hue after untold millennia. It pulsed with a subtle luminescence, a light that didn't seem to come from my headlamp. My breath hitched. This was it. This was the source. The signal, the dreams, they all pointed to something far beyond human understanding, something that had been here, watching, long before we even knew to look up. My phone, still in my pocket, felt heavier than lead. Useless. What good was a connection to the modern world when faced with this? This was a language older than spoken words, a history etched in stone by beings who perceived time and space in ways I couldn't even begin to fathom. It was a low thrum, like the distant grinding of celestial bodies or the slow, deliberate beat of an impassably vast heart. The paintings continued, each one more disorienting than the last. I saw forms that were simultaneously solid and ephemeral, colors that shouldn't exist, and a pervasive sense of immense, ancient intelligence. A point of absolute nullity that seemed to draw the eye, to pull at something deep within my own consciousness. A wave of nausea washed over me. My vision swam. I leaned against a cool, slick wall, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an intrusion. I was peering into something I wasn't meant to see, a cosmic secret that had been buried for eons. Why here? Why this remote, forgotten corner of the planet? There was this a sanctuary, a prison, a warning. If these entities, or whatever they represented, were this ancient, this powerful, then what were they capable of? And why had they chosen to leave these traces, these cryptic messages in the stone? My gaze fell upon a section of the wall that seemed different. The paintings here were less defined, more abstract, like the fading impressions of a dream. But within them I could discern a pattern, a recurring motif that tugged at the edges of my memory. It was a symbol, simple yet profound, a circle with 3 intersecting lines. I'd seen it before. Where? My mind raced, sifting through years of astronomical data, forgotten theories, fringe research. It wasn't from any known stellar cartography. It wasn't a constellation. It wasn't a known pulsar or quasar, but it felt significant, like a key, a name. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth rock where the symbol was etched. It felt warm, impassably warm, considering the ambient temperature. A faint vibration emanated from it, a subtle tremor that seemed to echo the pulse I felt within my own chest. This was no mere artistic expression. This was a communication. A deliberate, ancient communication. But to whom and about what? I had to know more. I had to understand what these paintings meant, what that symbol represented. This wasn't just about a signal anymore. This was about a truth that could shatter everything I thought I knew about existence. But the deeper I went, the more I felt like I was losing myself, dissolving into the ancient consciousness that permeated this place. Was there anyone else who had ever found this? Anyone who had understood? It was cold, a biting, bone-deep chill that no amount of my hastily donned thermal gear could fully ward off. My breath plumed in front of me, ghosts in this subterranean tomb. The paintings on the walls, crude and yet unsettlingly sophisticated, seemed to writhe in the periphery of my vision, their ochre and charcoal forms shifting as if alive. I'd been here for hours, following the faint, persistent hum that had led me away from the surface, away from the familiar, into this oppressive darkness. The signal. It wasn't just a radio wave anymore. It was a resonance, a vibration that seemed to echo in the very marrow of my bones. It was strongest here in this chamber, where the pictographs depicted swirling vortexes and impassable geometries. They depicted it. Or at least, what the ancient minds who'd scratched these images into the rock had perceived of it. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache that had worsened with every step deeper into the earth. It felt like pressure building behind my eyes, a physical manifestation of the overwhelming wrongness that permeated this place. The hum intensified, no longer a sound but a sensation, a tangible force pushing against my eardrums. The painted figures on the walls seemed to lean forward, their stylized eyes mere darts and dashes fixed on me. I tried to ignore the prickle of unease crawling up my spine. I was Dean, an astrophysicist, trained to observe, to analyze, to remain detached. This was just an anomaly, a very persistent, very unsettling anomaly. But detachment was becoming a luxury I could no longer afford. The very air seemed to shimmer, not with heat, but with a kind of visual static. The edges of my vision blurred, the solid rock walls appearing to ripple like water. I squeezed my eyes shut, rubbing my temples. This was stress. This was exhaustion. This was the effect of being isolated for too long, deep underground, chasing a ghost signal. When I opened them again, the shimmering was more pronounced. The paintings were no longer static. The swirling vortexes on the wall seemed to deepen, to pull inward, as if the rock itself was becoming a window. And through that window I saw. It was a color that didn't exist, a shape that defied geometry, a hunger that was ancient beyond comprehension. The hum became a roar, a deafening symphony of impassable frequencies that vibrated through the soles of my boots, up my legs, into my chest cavity. My teeth rattled. This wasn't just a signal. It was an invitation, or worse, a breach. The cave system was not a location. It was a focal point, a thin place where something vast and terrible was attempting to bleed through. The ancient artists hadn't been depicting a phenomenon, they'd been leaving a warning. My hand instinctively went to the satchel at my side, to the small, lead-lined containment unit I'd brought. It was designed to shield sensitive equipment, to dampen exotic energies. It was utterly inadequate for this. I had to do something. The sheer, crushing weight of its awareness was pressing down, not just on my physical being, but on my very consciousness. It felt like it was trying to unravel me, atom by atom, to absorb me into its impossible existence. It was no longer a window, it was a doorway. And through it, tendrils of impossible color began to snake into the chamber, reaching, probing. They were not solid, not gas, but something else entirely, something that distorted the very air around them. The paintings, now fully detached, swirled around these alien extensions, like leaves caught in an unfathomable wind. I stumbled backward, my boots scraping on the uneven floor. My breath hitched. The pressure in my head was unbearable. I could feel the tendrils reaching for me, not physically touching, but brushing against my mind, my soul, with a touch that promised oblivion. My scientific curiosity had led me here, to the precipice of something that would shatter everything I understood about existence. I had a choice. I could succumb, let this ancient hunger consume me, add my consciousness to its vast, unknowable tapestry, or I could try to close the door, but how? The containment unit was useless. My equipment was designed for observation, not defense against a cosmic entity. Then I remembered the power source for my deep scan equipment, a compact, highly unstable energy cell. It was designed for a single, massive discharge, a burst of pure, untamed energy. It was dangerous, unpredictable. It could fry my equipment, or worse. But it might be enough. Enough to disrupt whatever focal point this cave represented. Enough to slam the door shut. The tendrils were closer now, their alien presence a suffocating blanket. I could feel my thoughts scattering, my sense of self fraying at the edges. My hand trembled as I reached for the energy cell. It was a gamble, a desperate, insane gamble. But the alternative was unimaginable. With a choked gasp, I pulled the cell free. Its surface was unnervingly warm, humming with latent power. I looked at the energy cell, then at the expanding doorway. Was this the only way? Was there any other path but this descent into madness? It was cold, a biting, bone-deep chill that no amount of exertion could warm. My hands, still slick with the residue of whatever had coated the cavern floor, trembled as I fumbled with the flashlight. The beam, weak and flickering, painted jerky shadows on the walls, illuminating the swirling, impassable forms that seemed to writhe just beyond my periphery. I stumbled backward, my boots skidding on loose scree. The paintings, they weren't just art. They were a chronicle, a warning. I'd seen them, felt them, experienced them in a way no one else could. The sheer, unadulterated wrongness of it all had seared itself into my mind. It was like staring into the maw of a universe that had no room for me, for anything I understood. My teeth chattered, a frantic, uncontrolled rhythm. It was a fundamental tremor that ran through my entire being, response to the knowledge I now carried. The signal, it wasn't a transmission. A sigh, from something impossibly vast, impossibly old, that had merely brushed against our perception. and I, in my hubris, had tried to grab hold. I needed to get out. Now. The thought was a desperate, primal urge, but my legs felt like lead. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this place that felt like the very womb of cosmic despair. Yet, a morbid fascination held me captive. My eyes traced the lines of the ancient art, searching for answers I knew wouldn't be there, for a way to unsee what I had seen. The residue on my hands felt warm now, a stark contrast to the frigid air. It pulsed faintly, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate with my own frantic heartbeat. I wiped them on my trousers, but the sensation lingered, a phantom touch that made my skin crawl. Had I brought something back with me? A fragment, a seed. I forced myself to move, each step a monumental effort. The beam of my flashlight danced ahead, revealing a narrow passage. It was a gamble. I didn't know if it led deeper into the earth or towards the surface. But staying here, surrounded by the silent, accusing gaze of the cave paintings, was no longer an option. The weight of what I had witnessed pressed down on me, a tangible force that threatened to crush my will. The passage narrowed, forcing me to squeeze through. The rough rock scraped against my clothes, a grating sound that grated on my nerves. The air grew heavier, the earthy smell replaced by something sharp, metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike, but far more potent. A faint light flickered in the distance, a pale, sickly luminescence that drew me forward with an almost irresistible pull. Was it the entrance or something else? My breath hitched. The paintings had shown a descent, a falling away. Had I just followed them? They were not words, but pure, unadulterated meaning, a language of existence that my human mind was ill-equipped to process. My fingers brushed against something smooth, cool, and unnaturally uniform. I pulled my hand back as if burned. It was not rock. It felt like polished obsidian, but it was impossibly vast, a wall that stretched beyond the reach of my flashlight. And it was humming. A low, resonant thrum that vibrated in my chest, making my teeth ache. I was no longer just exploring a cave. I had stepped into something else, something that had been waiting. The paintings weren't just a record, they were a map, a diagram of what lay beneath, and I had followed it. The light ahead intensified, no longer a flicker but a steady, unwavering glow. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating quiet. I could feel it now, a pressure building, a sense of immense, ancient power gathering itself. What had I unleashed by disturbing its slumber? Was this the source of the signal, or was it merely a gateway to something far, far worse? The hum of the obsidian-like surface intensified, and the air grew impassably still, as if the very world was holding its breath. I was trapped between the incomprehensible past etched into the stone and the terrifying unknown that lay just beyond the light. My hands, still tingling, felt strangely heavy. Had I touched it? Had I taken something from this place? My breath plumed out in ragged white ghosts, dissipating into the oppressive gloom. The flickering beam of my headlamp danced across the ochre and charcoal figures on the cave walls, their stylized forms seeming to writhe in the unsteady light. They were ancient, impassably so, depicting scenes that spoke of a world before my own, a world that had witnessed things I could only now begin to grasp. The paintings weren't just art, they were warnings. I'd seen the signal, I'd followed it. And now here in this forgotten sanctuary, I was seeing the echoes of its arrival. The pressure in my chest intensified. It wasn't just the air. It was the weight of what I knew, what I had glimpsed through the crack in reality I'd accidentally pried open. The signal hadn't been a communication. It had been a doorway, and something had been looking through. I'd spent years staring at the stars, cataloging their predictable dance, seeking patterns, seeking meaning. I'd found them, of course, but they were the meaning of a clockwork mechanism, precise and devoid of soul. This was different. This was the raw, untamed essence of existence, a vast, uncaring ocean in which our tiny planet was less than a speck of dust. A scuttling sound, too sharp, too close, echoed from deeper within the cavern. My headlamp snapped towards the noise. Nothing, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, prickling with a primal alarm. My hand instinctively went to the heavy geologist's hammer I'd brought. It felt absurdly inadequate. I'd come here searching for answers, for proof, for a way to understand the impossible hum that had bled into my instruments, into my very mind. I'd found it. The truth was a suffocating blanket, heavy with the scent of ozone and something else. Something acrid, like burnt sugar and despair. The paintings showed figures, vaguely humanoid but elongated, their limbs impassably thin, their heads too large. They were depicted reaching not towards the heavens, but into them, pulling at something that wasn't there, or perhaps something that was too vast to be seen. And then a shift. The figures became distorted, their forms melting, merging with the negative space around them. The implication was clear. They had reached too far. They had touched it. My own journey had been a mirror of those ancient depictions. I had reached for the anomalous signal, for the anomaly in the data, and in doing so, I had brushed against something that should have remained unknown. The signal had ceased days ago, abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped. My gaze fell upon a particular section of the wall. Here, the figures were no longer reaching. They were recoiling. Their painted faces, if they could be called faces, were contorted in what could only be interpreted as agony. And behind them, a new presence began to emerge. This was the resolution I had sought, wasn't it? The understanding of the anomaly. It wasn't a scientific phenomenon to be dissected and catalogued. It was a consciousness, ancient and alien, that existed on a scale that made my entire universe a fleeting thought. It didn't seek to conquer or destroy in any way I could comprehend. It simply was, and its very existence was a corrosive agent to the ordered reality I understood. I backed away, my boots crunching on loose scree. The paintings seemed to blur, the figures merging into a single, terrifying tableau. I had seen what I came for. I had seen the truth that lay beyond the comforting veil of ignorance. It was a truth that would forever taint my perception, that would make the familiar stars seem like the vacant eyes of a sleeping leviathan. The paintings receded behind me, but the images were burned into my mind, a permanent scar. The cave system, with paintings older than humans, felt like a tomb, not just for its ancient inhabitants, but for the man I had been before I stepped inside. I knew I had to leave, to get back to the surface, to the semblance of my old life. It was watchful, and as I moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. Had I truly escaped the attention I had so foolishly courted?